So this is just after 08:33 hours GMT, 8:33 a.m. UK local time in London, UK. And The Guardian on page 11 has got an item headed Taking Back What's Mine. Thandiwe Newton reclaims her original name. Thandiwe or Thandiwe, the original African pronunciation. She dropped it when she was letting herself be brainwashed by the indigenous, majority among whom she was getting schooled in London and UK. And she dropped that W from her name Thandiwe and made it pronounceable as Thandi Newton. And now she's being given the platform by The Guardian. And it's written by, or at least byline to, somebody called Lucy Campbell, who says that the actor formerly known as Thandi Newton has said she is reclaiming the original Zulu-derived spelling of her name for use in her career, declaring, "I'm taking back what's mine." For more than 30 years, the actor born Melanie Thandiwe Newton Parker has been known by an anglicized version of her name since the W was dropped carelessly from her first acting credit. Thandiwe, whose name means beloved, said she was setting the record straight and that in all future projects she would be credited with her name spelled correctly. In an interview with British Vogue, Newton, who played a character called Thandiwe in her first film, Flirting, in 1991, declared, "That's my name. It's always been my name. I'm taking back what's mine." The Westward actor, who will appear on the cover of the May issue of Vogue, spoke to the writer Diana Evans for the magazine about her 3-decade-long career and what had changed in the industry. "The thing I'm most grateful for in our business right now is being in the company of others who truly see me and to not be complicit in the objectification of Black people as others, which is what happens when you are the only one," she said. Newton, who is 48, said she had been inspired to be more outspoken as she grew older. "I have changed a whole lot. Many lives have been lived since then." And there is absolutely no end to the list of achievements The Guardian attaches to her. Now, this is very telling. I mean, in the culture, in the nomenclature that is prevalent among Muslim communities across the subcontinent, that includes India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and extends to Sri Lanka as well, and Nepal and other places where there are Muslims, but the numbers are smaller. There are common names for women and men, but the women's name, the common name, is not as often used as the male counterpart. So, for example, the male, Muslim male, has got almost 90% of the times, the common first name is Muhammad. I mean, despite the anglicized distortions in the spelling, Muhammad is the common first name for Muslim males. And that is based on the idea that the Muhammad would indicate the male Muslim. And it is also a kind of continuation of the linkage with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. So Muhammad is not the kind of specific name of the individual, unless, of course, the individual has no middle name or middle names, because there are several lengthy middle names or parts of names in between the first common name, that is Muhammad, and the last name, which is, in the British context, for example, in the Western context or British context mainly, used as the surname. The last name is the surname. So when I arrived in the UK, I didn't use my common name, Muhammad, because that was not my specific name. And my specific name or names in the middle were not recognized by the people in the indigenous host community in Britain. So they misused my first common name. So I became Muhammad, and everything in the middle got lost to them, and they latched onto my last name, which is the Haq. And this went on for as long as I could remember. And as I've said before, not in this edition, but a white person that I met in the 70s, I don't know whether he's still alive or not, but his name was Fred Short. And he became quite positive in his attitude towards me. And while we were discussing, for some reason, names and nomenclature, he said to me that drop the Muhammad. He said it like that. He said, drop the Muhammad, otherwise you won't get anywhere in this country. Well, there are two things to that, because first of all, I didn't come here to get anywhere. This was a tentative move from me. I mean, I didn't know what I was going to do, essentially, but mainly to write. That was what I would have thought. Anything to do with writing, and writing about the world, about society, etc., etc. So he said, Fred Short, that once they see your name Muhammad, that's it. You are done for. You cannot get anywhere. You won't get any entrance anywhere, access, anything. Now, from his perspective, he was absolutely correct. And also, the fact that he said that I couldn't get anywhere added a dimension to my outlook, a practical, empirical dimension that I had not previously had any reason to kind of consider. because my experience up to the time that I felt the need to kind of travel outside of my country of birth had been completely different. I didn't have to justify any part of my name or anything. And there was no question ever. And I didn't, of course, have to justify my ethnicity, race, faith, whatever. So when Fred Short said that, it did the same thing to my understanding of my outlook and my attitude, etc. And my thinking in terms of the relevance and the impact of my name. It did have the same impact as I had a few years later in 1981, when I was involved in the National Union of Journalists attempted publication called East End News. Now, the East End News was not my idea. It was a project that was set up by a group of National Union of Journalists, members who claimed themselves to be on the left. So I'm holding this Tandiwe piece of The Guardian before the camera. And the National Union of Journalists had set up this Eastern News for a reason that they didn't explain. They didn't explain to me. But the idea that there was an initiative like that and that it would be de facto rival to the existing, what is now called, and I call it, and I have been calling it for a long time, the East London Idiotizer. That was quite interesting for me. And in principle, it was something that I would want to support. And I was still a member of the NUJ as far as I can recall. So what happened was that I met somebody who is sadly no longer with us, but she also joined the outlet. And she was not from the East End, but she had the ideological kind of interest in supporting this Eastern News. And she was very fresh out of university, Cambridge. In the group discussions that were held at the office of the project Eastern News, it became quite clear that she, Kate, what's her name? Kate Hamilton Bailey, with a bracket there, sorry, with a hyphen there. Kate Hamilton Bailey said things that were very much like what I was saying. I didn't know her, but that is what became very clear consistently. And as we became quite close, very soon, she drove and she was picking me up one day, and we were driving to a kind of assignment, let's say. Remember, this was a voluntary thing. It wasn't done for money. I never worked for any paper or publication as such for money. So, but this was for her as well. Kate was also not involved in the project for any return. It was the principle, the ideology, and the commitment. And on that day, or to the Monday, after the weekend, I was meeting her on the Monday. And as I sat there, she started to drive and she offered me a cigarette. Now, it was the weekend that I had given up smoking. I never have touched a cigarette since then, literally. So that was 1981. And Kate says to me, I said, I've given up. And she didn't believe me. She said, she laughed, of course, as a kind of friendly laughter. It wasn't one of scorn, but she was laughing because she thought that the number of cigarettes that I had smoked until the previous week when we were together the last time until this Monday. She said, you will never be able to keep this promise. And I said to her that you just made up my mind. Of course, this is the first time that I'm talking to you since giving up the smoking. But since you said that I cannot keep this promise, means that I will have to keep the promise. And that was 1981, so it is 40 years. I gave up smoking 40 years ago, and I have not touched, literally have not touched a tobacco or cigarette. So when Fred said to me, he said a few years previously, the same thing. He said that if you keep your name Muhammad as the first name, you won't get anywhere in Britain. He wasn't, again, like Kate, he wasn't kind of criticizing me. He was just telling me what he knew to be the truth of the society. And he said they are absolutely not prepared to accept Muhammad as anyone among them. Muhammad is the name. It's nothing to do with the character, the commitment of the person. So this was Fred Short a few years before Kate Hamilton Bailey. And they both made up my mind. And what this collection of coconuts, Munira Mirza, Tori Siwa, have done is to further consolidate the evidential foundation on which Fred Short actually had based his opinion to me about what he thought was the unacceptability of the name Muhammad. So it was a racist, very anti-Muslim society that Fred Short was communicating about to me. Of course, the Kate Hamilton Bailey's advice was nothing to do with the race, but it was to do with the personal kind of view that she had of me about smoking. That is not something that is a function of race or ethnicity. To the personal thing. And my response to her was not motivated by any race or ethnicity or anything. It's very personal. I was reassuring her of my degree of determination. It wasn't a retort to her, but it was a reassurance that I would not break my promise on such an important matter. And for 40 years, I have not broken that promise. Now, this is only one of many things that I have not broken my promise on. And this one is very important because along with the advice that Fred Short gave me, that this is a very anti-Muslim, racist society which is not likely to change its outlook anytime soon. That was in the 1970s. So it's more than 40 years ago. And that has been vindicated. Fred Short has been vindicated. And there are more people like Fred Short who, when they are conversing or communicating with people they come to be close to or be friends with, than any Munira Mirza or Tony Sewer. Now, only in the last 24 hours, I have come across a so-called PhD thing given to Munira Mirza. It is dated 2009 by the University of Kent. And her PhD thing is about what I call the Rich Mess Center. And it's the racists who founded it, the racist crooks who founded it, call it Rich Mix Center. And we have discussed the Rich Mess Center in several editions of this program before. Especially, the latest discussion was about the corrupt behavior of John Biggs, the incumbent in the corrupt post of the elected mayor in Tower Hamlets. And I was pointing out that within literally 24 hours of his taking the post, dated the 11th of June 2015, John Biggs did the first executive decision making. And that executive decision making was to write off, that is to say, excuse the Rich Mess Center of several millions pounds of debt that it owed to the council. Now, the history of the connection between Tower Hamlets Council and the Rich Mess Center can be very briefly summarized by saying that the main criminals and racists who abuse the council's position or the council's resources in setting up this corrupt, racist, Rich Mess Center included Michael Crook and his, let's say, his partner, who was married to somebody else, Denise Jones. And they had with them Una King. And it was not something that was set up to enhance the culture or to enable the people in the East End of London to have a free access or educational access or equal, let's say, access. It is a completely corrupt contraption created by the racist Michael Crook and his colluders. Now, that was not long before Munira Mirza got her attention on this one. Because she is not from the East End of London, she is not from the ordinary demography that is mainly either indigenous white people or mainly Bangladeshis. And she is not, of course, from the Polish background, but the Polish numbers are increasing quite significantly, or at least have been until Brexit. The fact that she, Munira Mirza, decided to do a, quote, PhD on the Rich Mess Center based in Tower Hamlets is extraordinarily significant. As I said, she is not from the Bangladeshi background, and she is not known in the East End of London, never has been. And yet I find today, 12 years after she became a part of the propaganda through the academic kind of route of this corrupt, racist adventure. Of course, when the lying propaganda is done by a PhD, it is given disproportionate amount of academic like legitimacy. Now, all the PhD theses outside of the kind of physical sciences area, let's say medicine, physics, chemistry, and those ones, I have not studied those, but I have studied enough kind of dissertations, either for MS or PhDs or anything else, or comparable kind of degrees or awards. And the evidence is that only maybe a fractions of a percent contain anything that can be remotely called original contribution, directly attributable to the thing being part of the PhD. Otherwise, PhD is as I said previously, not in today's edition yet, but I'm going to. PhD is more a kind of a pimp's kind of badge. Well, there have been actual real life prostitutes holding a degree or PhD, but others who are not necessarily real life prostitutes in that sense have in effect behaved as prostitutes. And the universities or the conferring kind of academic elements have behaved as pimps and as brothel keepers, because the PhDs are not what historically, originally they might have been. So all the dissertations and various elaborate descriptions and badges that are given to these PhD things are to make the illicit legitimate. Not only do the PhDs not investigate original evidence and original kind of operations of the various issues, they are designed to provide, these particular topics are designed to provide an appearance of legitimacy while peddling the lies. So, as I said, there are several PhD prostitutes that have done a lot of damage to the cause of opposing racism in society, including by abusing the location of tar hamlets and particularly the Bangladeshi communities. And we shall be taking apart chapter and verse these racist pieces of prostitution. Now, Munira Mirza, we shall take apart her thing as well, not in this particular edition. Here we are just introducing contextually and topically what she has done. Now remember, that was 2009, which was long way away. from Boris Johnson getting anywhere near Downing Street. He was in post as the elected mayor, so-called, at the expense of London. And he was some years before away from meeting Jennifer Arcuri, whom she met during that second part. He had two innings. One is 2008 to 2012 and 2012 until 2016, when the election produced the coconut Sadiq Khan. Now, in 2009, Munira Mirza was already working with Johnson, who made her a deputy mayor. I mean, he made many deputy mayors. One of the kind of criminal options that are available to an executive mayor. Either it's a borough mayor or it's a regional mayor, as in the case of London. And Munira Mirza was not known in 2009. She was not known until way after that, because she began to promote the very denial of racism that she is now familiar with and notorious for. Towards the later part of that first kind of period of Johnson as the incumbent in mayor. Now we'll have to fact check and see exactly which year she became appointed by Johnson as the kind of paid coconut for him to peddle the racist lies and denials. But going back to the Rich Mess Center, which is geographically based in the vicinity of Brick Lane, it's actually sited in the Bethnal Green Road, near the underground or overground railway station called Shoreditch. And it has got every aspect of it has got alienation from the local community about it, written all over the place. Alienation and bourgeois kind of pretentiousness. I mean, Murdoch's Times has created a paywall a few years after I published any number of comments on the online, kind of Times online, before Murdoch introduced the paywall obstruction. And one of those kind of comments that I made, and it was published because I had hundreds of comments published online by the Times and other online operations of Fleet Street papers and titles. And one of those comments that I made was around 2006. And I condemned the quoted utterance by Denise Jones. Now, those who don't know Denise Jones, and those who don't know Townless Council, need to be told this, that Denise Jones is not known for her intellectual depth or rigor. Denise Jones is a very shallow person intellectually. But what she has benefited from is her association with a serial number of racists who have held various positions in Tower Hamlets. And Denise Jones was quoted by the Times about the Rich Mess Center, that what she was implying in that quotation, which I shall try to find again from some other source, not from the Times Online, but some other source that I have access to, or I may have access to. She said, Denise Jones, words to the effect that the Rich Mass Center was an initiative which she supported because it would give opportunities to those who know the area Shoreditch and Bethnal Green Road and the Rich Mass Center will know that there is a place not far from there which is called the Arnold Circus. And the Arnold Circus is associated with what is claimed to be the first council housing estate in England. Again, that is subject to fact checking, what the actual specific claims are about the Arnold Circus. But it's in that direction she was pointing in her alleged quote. And she was saying that young men from the poverty-stricken area around Arnold Circus would get a good access for whatever. Now, Denise Jones is not from Tower Hamlets originally, but because of her officially known marriage to Dan Jones, she has been resident in Tower Hamlets in Shadwell for a significant number of years. Although she has been resident, her connections with the ordinary folk in the demography, the connections have been practically very limited. And because of the racist kind of logistics and institutional racist operation of society and links, Denise Jones has been linked tokenistically with a very small number of Bangladeshis. And she has pictures of those encounters or appearances. But essentially, she doesn't know the Bangladeshi community. So, Munira Mirza titled her prostitute PhD. I'm not calling her a prostitute, but the PhD thing is a prostitute thing. So anyone tempted to say that I called her a prostitute must remember what I'm saying. This is a disclaimer. I'm saying that her PhD thing was a prostitute thing, not herself as a prostitute in the conventional sense, because I don't know enough about her to say definitively whether she has been a prostitute or not. But I definitely know that this piece of research, so-called PhD, is a prostitution or prostitute piece. Now, in the course of her so-called research, Munira Mirza met or had contacts with Denise Jones and other crooks involved in the Rich Mass Center. Now, if she had, or if she didn't have, it would make no difference, because her mission was not to scrutinize the evidence, let alone to question the racists about their denial. Her mission was, as a coconut, to use a plausible sounding kind of area and a plausible sounding kind of project to establish a kind of CB entry for herself, that she was some sort of expert due to that prostitute piece of research, and that it was so near the HQ of the City Hall. Now, the City Hall is the official name, but in our vocabulary, outside of the records, we have a very different name for it, which intelligent viewers may imagine. The actual description, not far from the sound of City Hall. Now, Munira Mirza is not the only kind of operative for the racist state who have been deployed in Tower Hamlets. Solely because Tower Hamlets generally, and the Brick Lane area in particular, these are associated very directly with the Bangladeshi community in the UK and the Siloti speaking Muslim Bangladeshi people in specific terms. So she has been deployed there in Tower Hamlets to abuse the presence of the Bangladeshis, the Siloti speakers, and the Muslims, and to pit these particular backgrounds and identities against the racist, hostility, if you like, and to diagnose, wrongly diagnose, or to pretend to diagnose the inadequacies of the Muslims, the Bangladeshis, and the Silotis. And other thieves and crooks and prostitute PhD doers have stolen without any hesitation from my work all over the place over the decades. And these criminals, if they were kind of interrogated face to face, wouldn't know even the description, correct description of Brick Lane, let alone the whole of the area and the population. And these criminals have been given PhDs. They're illiterate, they're literally illiterate, and they're also evidentially illiterate, and they're most certainly intellectually illiterate or subliterate. So they are floating around through the corrupt university departments in England, at least a dozen PhDs that are claimed to have been based on studies of Tower Hamlets population. Tower Hamlets is not being studied by these PhD criminals as an abstract. Tower Hamlets has been the subject of dedicated onslaught via the assault projects aimed at the Bangladeshis, the Silotis, and the Muslims. And I'm going back, say, the last 20, 30 years. Now remember, those 30 years, let's say, also coincide, that is, the start of the 30 years, let's say, coincide with the first recorded awareness and action in any sustained way against racist attacks. That means that we have been against racist attacks before, but the scale of the activities, as recognized from the late 1970s, starting shortly after the murders of Altawali and Ishaq Ali in 1978. The scale was significantly smaller and shorter and narrower before 1978, let's say. And when the criminals, looking for some kind of subject that they could claim real understanding about, when they found out that the Bangladeshis mainly the Silotis, mostly following my initiatives, Silotis were standing up to all the racists at every level. They thought, my goodness, we've got a ready-made PhD area. The fertility of the resources. They could not believe these morons. And the racist academic tutors and supervisors, whatever, could not believe their luck either. So combined, between those academic supervisor criminals and racists and their counterpart stooges racists, created a plethora of PhDs that we shall have to diagnose and dissect and destroy. It's like, of course, T.B. Macaulay. When he said he would turn the subcontinent into externally unaltered. Most of the subcontinent people look very similar in terms of shade and pigmentation, similar to me. But internally, they would become absolute slaves of the English. That didn't happen. Of course, that did happen in case of some of the people, but not with the majority. They did something else with the small number. They manipulated the people, and the manipulation went on a daily basis. Now, what they're doing now, and they have been doing since 1947, is to deny the 190 years of empire in the subcontinent. And time and again, the descendants in the mainland England of Robert Clive and Thomas Babington Macaulay have been at it, have been actively trying to recreate that scenario where they can find coconuts and niece Tom and nephew Toms like Munira Mirza and Tony Sewer. And so while Tony Sewer has been given the responsibility to kind of make the denials at the expense of the African people who came here through the Caribbean, Munira Mirza has been given the task of destroying the truth and replacing it with the knee-storm lies that suits the congenital liar Boris Johnson and his ilk. Now, if Munira Mirza were introduced anywhere in the context of the Bangladeshi Silotis people in the Barabta hamlets, nobody would know her unless somebody accidentally knows about her. Well, they most certainly would not have known about her until even the fact that she was one of the deputy mayor appointees by Boris Johnson didn't register with the people. The only time she has become part of identifiable, recognizable name is with this nephew Tom and niece Tom denial of racism that they have issued in the last fortnight. So going back to 2009 and looking at the Rich Mess Center, it has never been relevant to the local community. It never is. So when Munira Mirza refers to that one, the intended target, her approvers, her racist approvers in the so-called academic world and the media, and politics, let's say, wouldn't know the difference. Because they are as alien, as much strangers to Tower Hamlets as she is. And she remains. Another kind of topical, entertaining reference. The Rich Mess Center is not far from where Boris Johnson took technology lessons from Jennifer Arcuri in nearby Shoreditch, let's say, whatever flat. Think about that. Now, that was not done directly with the knowledge of Munira Mirza, as far as we know. But we do know that Munira Mirza has known Boris Johnson on a different kind of timeline. And it is not clear as to what the extent or the depth of her relationship with Boris Johnson has been. It may be the case that actual details will come out, but it is hardly likely that she will be the one to publicize anything of the detailed relationship she had with Johnson. But it is clear that he treats her, Munira Mirza, as a more reliable source of propaganda and spewing than he has done with any other publicly known Asian person. In fact, the treatment by Dominic Cummings of the advisor to Sajid Javid when he was in the post of Chancellor of the Exchequer is a contrast that is significant. So we don't know whether the former advisor to Sajid Javid, who was frog marched and was escorted out of the street, Downing Street, by police and was immediately deprived of her identity papers or whatever. Whether there has been any other Pakistani origin employee in the Downing Street bureaucracy, we don't know that at present. So it leaves only Munira Mirza, who is described as the head of the Downing Street Policy Unit today in the entry on the Wikipedia. That is the only one that we've been able to see any detailed mention of her. So Munira Mirza is one that was deployed to give a gloss through the academic kind of channels for the Rich Mass Center. And in the details, she actually implies many things that are absolutely wrong about the affiliations and connections of the Bangladeshis, the Silotis, about whom she knows absolutely nothing. So she is one, a Pakistani origin, British-born, within quote Muslim, because it is completely possible that she doesn't believe in Islam or doesn't have much respect for Islam. And I shall come to the reason why I'm saying that. It's not a speculation, because she has not made any known attempt at supporting the right to freedom of speech that should be available to the parents who protested against the Batley grammar school teacher. And we know that another English-born, Pakistani origin, quote, Muslim woman who has been recruited only recently in the last week by Boris Johnson, has attacked the Muslim parents. And it is very likely that her appointment to the Downing Street bureaucracy to serve Boris Johnson's electoral propaganda purpose in the north is connected with Munira Mirza's role in recruiting people for Boris Johnson's electoral purposes. Back to Brick Lane and why the racists and anti-Muslims in the media and the mainstream politics have been latching on to the image as described, not necessarily as pictured. The image of Brick Lane. Remember, my battle against the British racist media, attacks on the Silotis, Bangladeshis, Muslims in Brick Lane, dates back 5 decades, covers 5 decades, let's say. So when I was standing in the corner of Quaker Street, Quaker, Quaker Street and Brick Lane, because Quaker Street crosses into another street to the east and crosses Brick Lane. And I was standing there right outside the kind of building which houses the Spitalfields Housing Association. I was standing there about 10, 11, 12 years ago. And there was this kind of dark-skinned Asian Muslim who had been given too many outings on British television as a Muslim critic of Islamic society or Muslim communities. So frequently had he been shown on the BBC and other programs intended to vilify and demonize the Muslims that I had no difficulty in recognizing who he was as I was standing, either talking to someone or I was waiting to meet someone at that point. And this character was standing facing a camera, television camera, the big kind of expensive video camera being operated by a white man. So I thought that now this is a program that they're making by using Brick Lane in the propaganda against Muslims and depicting this street, Quaker Street and Brick Lane, because although they were standing in Quaker Street, the name of Brick Lane on the wall could be seen from that angle where they were standing or the camera was kind of recording from. So the idea was to depict Brick Lane as a cesspit of Muslim radicals. That is the narrative. And as everyone knows, there has been no radical activity in Brick Lane ever. If there is, and anyone watching this knows there has been, then strictly as a fact checker, send me a direct message and give me the time, date, and kind of year, whatever, and what the actual evidence was. There has been no radical activity in Brick Lane. So remember, I'm talking about 10, 11, 12 years ago. So why were they doing that? So I approached him and I said, why are you doing this? What are you doing? I said, you are here on a mission to tell lies about Brick Lane. You are going to say that we are radicals and whatever. Ordinary people that were passing by wouldn't know who he was, let alone to tell him what I was telling him. But I have been studying all these racist media exceptionally consistently for a very long time. So I knew what he was doing there, because there was no accident, there was no fire, there was no attack, there was no fight. So the only reason he could be there would have been to invent a story and a line and a narrative, or add Bricklane to a narrative that was against the truth of the community. While I was quizzing him, I was joined by another person who heard or overheard enough of what I was telling him. And he came and immediately backed me, because he understood enough of what I was saying to this one. And he backed me and said, "Why are you here? You are doing harm to our community." Remember the contrast I'm going to say? Ted Jury did a completely opposite kind of thing from a location in Tower Hamlets, which will remain one of the most disgraceful racist criminal fabrications that Ted Jury has ever done. We shall come to Ted Jury's racist criminality in due course, not in this particular bit, but let me assure anyone watching this that this program is called Diagnosing Fleet Street. And it's also called the World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. These contents are evidence, world exclusive evidence, items of evidence that this is world exclusive, and it is diagnostic. We are examining the behavior of the criminals that are very actively engaged in festering racism, festering anti-Muslim lies. Now today, Tuesday, 6th of April 2021, in the mainstream internet, there is a story going around based on The Guardian online that features a picture, a group picture of David Cameron, then India's Narendra Modi, and then Boris Johnson, all three of them laughing. We shall come to that picture in due course. And this reference I'm making is just to show that the relationship between the mainstream British media and regimes in India have been very significantly positive, favorable, and in denial of the massacres of the Muslims that are carried out in India every year. Mass rapes, massacres, gang rapes, murders of particularly Muslims. Now, that is not to deny the fact that a huge number of the so-called Dalit, or what used to be called the scheduled caste, or people of the so-called lower castes across India, mass murders of them takes place every year. Mass rapes takes place against them, their community, every year. And there is no remedy, there is no relief, there is no justice for those people against the perpetrators and criminals. So while The Guardian is cautiously commenting on the fact that people are getting concerned about the Johnson-fronted British government getting too close with Narendra Modi, even The Guardian is not acknowledging the massacres and the genocidal attacks and the anti-Muslim violence that goes on every single, let's say, week across India. So there is no question of the British media, BBC or whoever, sending any crew to Southall, let's say, or in any other part of England where it is known that people from the Indian background have significant settlement presence. And except for Bradford in 1989, when a copy of these satanic verses was burned, thus giving inordinate and disproportionately exaggerated kind of excuse for the media to refer to Bradford as a hotbed of Muslim intolerance. No part of the English urban areas populated by Pakistanis has been given the kind of hostile, concentrated attention in that way as the media has focused on the Siloti-speaking Bangladeshi Muslim community embodied by and in the Brick Lane area. And this is serious enough. So serious that I've been forced for decades to first of all monitor what is going on, and then to take apart every single attack that I can identify. Having said that, let me add, there is no councillor, there is no politician, there is no MP, there is no active campaign other than any organized, mobilized by me to do the defending of the community. If you don't agree with this fact, send me a direct message disagreeing with me. But when you do disagree, give me the chapter and verse and the date and location where events have taken place differently than I have said they have taken place. Because for 50 years of concentrated defense of the community, or 5 decades, let's say, to be accurate, I have not seen any action in this context. So what do these people do, these leaders so-called? They don't defend the community. If you agree, if you disagree again on this point, send me a direct message giving the chapter and verse. Otherwise, don't bother. Because I know what I'm talking about and there has not been. This is not a competition, this is evidence. I don't need to compete with anyone. There doesn't exist anyone that I need to compete with or compete against. Because I'm the one who is mobilizing the campaigns, the advocacy, the resistance, and the rest of it. So the field of action doesn't have anyone else. I'm the one who is defending the community. And not just the community, I'm defending the whole electorate. So I say again, on the 6th of May coming, vote no to the elected mayor. Scrap the elected mayor post. So when Boris Johnson's head of policy unit, which she was not at the time in 2009, published this prostitute paper at the expense of the Tar Hamlets Bangladeshi community, she did that completely empty thing for the benefit of racists. And in the 10, 11, 12 years since then, she has never made any contact with the people of Tar Hamlets. And she has not made a single statement defending the community. And she has not made a single point of view available about the rights of children. If she cared about the children, then she would have made a comment. The least she would have done it would have been to make a comment. So I was talking about Daphne Gould in a previous edition of this. I was talking about Daphne Gould, who was the incumbent head teacher of the Tower Hamlets Girls' School at the time in 1987, when the school was under attack for mixed sex kind of composition. There was a proposal by the Inner London Education Authority to start the process of making the school co-educational, mixed sex. And the reason I mentioned Daphne Gould is because I spent the best part of a year, in the whole program, in organizing the opposition to the proposal. And I organized it successfully. I defended the school's status quo composition. And the school remained single sex, and it has been single sex since then. That was 1987. So when I referred to Daphne Gould last week, I said at the end of the campaign, she didn't even ask me for a cup of tea. Now, that may sound like I was doing all this work in order to be offered a cup of tea. No way. I am the one who does things that cannot be bought by any amount of money. That's what I do. And compared to the £150,000 for a 1 hour speech that David Cameron gave, just multiply the thousands, hundreds of thousands of hours that I have given and I give. And you can begin to see the trillions of amounts that I could have charged. So I'm not somebody that can be kind of persuaded to change my mind by anything, cup of tea or whatever. The point I was making was that by not offering me a cup of tea, Daphne Gould was showing how corrupt, ungrateful, graceless, and stupid, discourteous she was. Why? Because she was near to tears at the time that the Inner London Education Authority proposal hit her. And she knew that she couldn't manage a mixed sex school at all. And she had nobody. None of the governors had a clue, none of the teachers had a clue. And apart from me in the community, there is no one. There was no one that could actually offer anything like a fraction of a resolution or answer to the attack. And I arrived there not because she invited me. I had known her existence, but I had no contact with her. I went there as part of my action that I thought was the only one that could be taken or should have been taken to stop the ILA doing the merging of the school. So I did that. What I'm saying by condemning Daphne Gould is a statement about the other so-called educated leaders, the white leaders in society that I've had kind of knowledge of, contacts with. I said previously that Peter Shaw in 1978 met with a number of about 20 Bangladeshis from Brick Lane. But he would not go ahead with the meeting unless I left the meeting. It wasn't a kind of condemnation of me or unsuitability of me on my part. It was the sheer absolute inability on the part of Peter Shore to tackle any questions that I would put to him as member of parliament as he was. And the lesson is that none of the 20 Bangladeshis even realized what he was doing. So what he did was he had an entry created that he met community leaders. He didn't say that he met community leaders after kind of making it clear that he didn't want to meet the leader of the community campaign who made the difference. So that is the kind of pattern. Daphne Gould kept the school and she forgot all about me. But the mental horizon that she thought I had was, of course, far wider than anything she could comprehend. If I were doing anything, in expectation of cup of tea or favor or whatever from her or anybody like her, I would never do anything. Because none of the campaigns I do and have done has anything to do with personally benefiting me. Go on and check the list. And so therefore, what Munira Mirza did was make tokenistic connections with people, put on our CV, and that's it. And anyone reading the stuff that she has written, or anyone reading the other stuff in the PhD brothel scripts by other criminals, without the knowledge that they should have, and by relying on the contents of that, would think that that is the truth. That was what was happening in Tower Hamlets. That never was. And it's not confined to the PhD thesis of the most brotheling and prostitutional type. When the BBC, as I said, BBC aired a thing called King of the Ghetto during May 1986. They vilified the whole community and they again targeted the Siloti Muslim Bangladeshis. Remember, there is a phone there, Siloti Muslim Bangladeshis Brick Lane. That's the target of the depiction. And they made a number of criminals come across as our saviors. Total and utter lies. Then they foisted this white woman, daughter of a Bengali, not a Siloti, and a white mother. And they paid her £500,000 or thereabouts in advance to write the thing, completely distorting Brick Lane and calling it Brick Lane. And they again targeted the Siloti Muslim Bangladeshis. And remember, at the beginning of the 50 years, let's say, within less than 2 years of Bangladesh, they mounted an attack on the Siloti Bangladeshi Muslims of Brick Lane by an article in the Sunday Times. And they said about us that our community didn't help Bangladesh. Now, anyone who knows anything about 71 also knows that it was the Siloti speaking people who actually did the main work for supporting Bangladesh cause and mobilizing the international community at the time for the cause of Bangladesh. Well, my family had many members in Tower Hamlets doing the same thing, but I'm not saying just them. All the Bangladeshis in Tower Hamlets in Birmingham, Manchester, other places did the same thing. And yet, the Sunday Times allowed this pack of lies The main lie being that the Bangladeshis, the Siloti speaking Bangladeshis, didn't want to support Bangladesh. That's what they said. Can you believe that? That is what they claimed in the Sunday Times assault. And if you look at the actual evidence of activities by anyone other than myself about any of those issues during those attacks, you'd find I'm the only one who has been doing the action. Well, in the case of the Sunday Times article, I had a few, quote, students at the time, but among the listed kind of names that often claim to be the leaders of the community, they were not doing anything. In fact, they were opposing the campaign that I was leading to defend in defense of the community. The same thing happened with the Janet Street Porter program on London Weekend Television. In 78, that was called London Weekend Show that Janet Street Porter fronted. I was the one who made the first on-the-record television statement about the murders of, well, Altaf Ali was murdered in May and Ishaq Ali was murdered 2 months later in July. So at that time, in May, it was only Altaf Ali that we were talking about. So the series, every single year, I have been doing multiple campaigns in defense of the community. Now, when I say that, I don't say that in relation to an election for a parliamentary seat or election for any council position. If I did that, I would not be doing the campaign. Doing the campaign as the campaign needs to be done on each issue that I have been doing requires giving up any connection with any electoral kind of post or position. Incompatible. It is totally incompatible. And the evidence is that currently those councillors in place are not campaigning for the justice for those schoolgirls. That is the topic, one topic that I can talk about. Because the council, Tar Hamlets Council, which deliberately neglected its legal duties as owed to the children in dire danger, that Tar Hamlets Council negligence actually destroyed the lives of these 4 girls that we know. There may be, and there is a strong possibility there may be, any number of other children that have been neglected, have been being neglected by Tar Hamlets Council, breaking its legal obligations. Now, this is a mouthful of a statement. Can anyone viewing this identify a single sitting councillor, Tar Hamlets councillor, who is doing anything about this except this campaign and this program? If you can, then send me a direct message and give me the date and chapter and verse of what they're doing actually. The real truth is that ever since these children were publicly identified as having gone to Syria, and they were identified in mainstream media reports on television in February 2015, ever since that has happened, I've been asking questions about. I've been asking legal, law-based questions about the actions that the Town Arms Council has taken to safeguard these children, because they were children. And they were children significantly, for a significant period after they were first reported as having gone into Syria in February 2015, they remained children after that as well. Whatever the actual dates of birth, they remained children. They continued to be legally entitled to expect serious, comprehensive, and rigorous backing and support by Town Arms Council. Now, this is something that I've been explaining now for 2 months. So, what has any single counselor, sitting counselor, said about these children, these girls, and what Town Arms Council should have done to help them? There is no single counselor that has said a single thing. And of course, I have discussed at length the total blank that has come from John Biggs and Lutfur Rahman, who was in post very much throughout the children being children. They were not adults when Lutfur Rahman was kicked out of this post on 23rd of April 2015 by Richard Morey. So Lutfur Rahman neglected the children. Biggs has neglected the children. And individual counselors have neglected the children. And those who have been holding any post as John Biggs's cabinet members have been neglecting their duties to these children. If they or anyone else supporting them wants to disagree with me on the facts, then please send me a direct message giving me chapter and verse that constitutes evidence that they have been doing something, as opposed to what I am saying, that they have been doing nothing. We shall come back to the chapter and verse update on the negligence of Town Arms Council towards these girls a bit later. So what has happened in the kind of period between the arrival of these girls in Syria in February 2015 and the tenure that was continuing up to the 23rd of April 2015, tenure of Lutfur Rahman. What did he do? Between February, March, and 23rd of April, up to 23rd of April 2015, did Lutfur Rahman ask anyone any question as to what the council was doing to help these girls? If Lutfur Rahman did ask any question, let him send a direct message to this program detailing what he did. And if he didn't do anything, let him say why he didn't do anything. Was it because if he helped these girls, his, that is Lutfur Rahman's, human rights would be lost or put at risk? Or did one of his advisors tell him not to do anything? If so, who was the advisor? Or who were the advisors? Did Lutfur Rahman consult Maulana Shamsul Haq of the Tower Hamlets Council of Mosques as to what he, Lutfur Rahman, should be doing to safeguard these children and rescue them and support the rescue operation at any cost? What advice did Maulana Shamsul Haq give to Lutfur Rahman? And according to what law? Did Lutfur Rahman consult the Metropolitan Police? If he did, who did he consult? And under what terms? What was the proposal that they were discussing, if they were discussing any proposal to help rescue these children? Did Lutfur Rahman make use of his connection with the East London Mosque to find out about these children? Did Lutfur Rahman ask the school these girls had attended to provide the fullest account of the activities that the school was aware of regarding these girls? Did Lutfur Rahman consult any campaigning organization in the community and seek any advice as to how to go about helping these children? Did he contact me and ask my opinion or seek my advice? Because I can give him the answer. He didn't. In fact, Lutfur Rahman perpetrated serial lies in relation to the issues that I did raise with him. Why did he lie? And is lying justifiable? If it is, what justified his lying? Because Lutfur Rahman lied to me starting from, in this context, starting from May 2010 up to the end of his period in post. Why did Lutfur Rahman tell lies? Or is Lutfur Rahman denying that he lied? Because there exists a series of video recorded evidence where Lutfur Rahman said one thing and he never carried out the promise that he made on each occasion. So the council is not only guilty of negligence, wanton negligence and indifference and lack of care towards these 4 girls. The council followed a racist motivation. Even though the executive mayor is not a non-Bangladeshi, himself being of Bangladeshi background and origin, he was born in Bangladesh. So he cannot be, it cannot be demonstrated easily that he was acting against the Bangladeshi community. But he was, because he was following the agenda, the narrative, the racist narrative and racist agenda. Now, I'm giving a direct answer to Melanie Phillips in the Times today. On page 26, she writes, academics are embracing gibberish studies. And the subheading says, social justice warriors on race and gender seem to prefer gobbledygook to persuasive argument. What I'm saying is not gibberish. What I'm saying is precisely the opposite of gibberish. I'm naming names and I'm saying things that are very precise. And the Times cartoon, not by Peter Brooks, is mocking Boris Johnson about the testing as well. Now, here is a mental slave surfacing as an apparent critic of the mental slave, Tony Sewer. This is called Fiaz Mughal, who is described there as founder of Faith Matters. And his is the first of three letters under the heading Sewell Report and the Need for Genuine Debate. Now we know Fiaz Mughal as a coconut. But Fiaz Mughal is a coconut of a slightly different variety than Trevor Terrible Phillips. And what he is doing here in this letter, so-called, he starts the first paragraph praising Trevor Terrible Phillips. And he praises Trevor Terrible Phillips by saying that Phillips is spot on when he says that extremists are using identitarian blackmail to nibble away at fundamental tenets of our democracy. Then he goes on to further praise Terrible Phillips. And he confesses that he, Fiaz Mughal, has worked for more than 20 years with government departments such as the Home Office and Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government on sensitive issues such as countering extremism and hate crimes. When I have repeatedly spoken up against LGBTQ hatred within parts of my co-religionists, Islamist extremism, and the undermining of our social values by such groups masquerading under the umbrella of countering Islamophobia. etc., etc. Now, of course, I mean, writing a letter to the Times to tell the truth is futile because the Times has its own racist agenda, and this is the evidence of it. In one kind of group of letters today, it's actually peddling three of the coconuts: Trevor Terrible Phillips, Tony Tory Sewer, and Fiaz Mughal. Well, the first two are not even members of the Muslim community. And Mughal is a member of the Muslim community, but he is sold out to the liars, and he is doing the lying by the Times. So the Times is not going to publish truthful letters or truthful opinion. And when was it published? When was the Times first set up? Well, this is the Times serial number today is 73,438. So for all those issues, the Times has been publishing lies in the main, and racist lies at that. So what I'm saying is that you can't stop racism by relying on the Times or the Guardian or the likes of Fiaz Mughal. Something else has to be done. And that something else begins with the telling of the truth against these liars every single time. So you create a foundation of truth telling, and then you look for action. You can't find action in the behavior of Keir Starmer or any of the MPs that he fronts. And he can't, most certainly, depend on the rest of Fleet Street, apart from the Times, to tell the truth. Because, like the Times, which is 73,000 issues long, the rest of its counterparts are similarly in denial of the truth. The Times, the Boris Graph, the Express, the Daily Mail, they didn't bring an end to any end to empire or imperialism. And they will not bring an end to racism. That the community that is affected by racism, imperialism, corruption, the community has to mobilize itself against the racist role of the media. And there is nothing in the academic world, as I have been saying repeatedly. I mean, I have highlighted the prostitute things called the PhD. Institutions that actually produce that kind of academic recognition can only be condemned for the brothel role that they're playing. So they're not moral high grounds of ethics and morality. The dungeons of corruption and criminality and lying and racism and prostituting the truth. How on earth could Munira Mirza, who was already on the record as having said exact word that there was no institutional racism in Britain, she had said that more than a year before this Tony Sewer report said the same sentence. How did she think that she would get away with this? How did she think that she could sell this lie that it was an original investigation by this bogus commission? We shall come back to that in later parts. Here in the Financial Times, you look at the Financial Times today, and this has got a uncommon headline because none of the other Fleet Street papers, including the Guardian, is even pretending to be anything other than part of the propaganda onslaught to create an image for Boris Johnson as the competent prime minister doing the best things for the country. Only the Financial Times has got any reservation in its front page report, which reads, Johnson set for clash with Tories after backing Corbyn passports. Now that's a partial kind of reservation, as I say. It's not a real reservation, but at least even that is significant when the others are blanket in their denial of the truth and in their propaganda for Johnson. And then there is this other piece which is about Cameron and his sleaze. Now this one actually reminds of David Cameron's corruption. And it is a kind of network of criminal gangsters looting billions. Now this one heading, commodities groups investigate web domains with links to Gupta's empire. Now Gupta is a name whose first name is Sanjeev Gupta. Sanjeev Gupta's empire is made of metals, involved in the metals dealings. So the Financial Times discovered that the domains were registered with a Liberty House email address. The Liberty House is Gupta's commodities trading and industrial group and part of his GFG Alliance conglomerate. The registrations include gunvorst.com, a name that resembles Gunvor, one of the world's largest oil traders. Gunvor declined to comment to the Financial Times. So what is happening with this Gupta appearance on the horizon of corruption and criminality of public money and lobbying and sleaze is that, this is something that I have always believed on the evidence. And the evidence includes the fact that all the academic studies about finance and economics are bogus, false. Now, I, of course, had a formal university link with the studying of economics. But that is not the source of most of my knowledge. Why? Because the actual university courses that I have empirically tasted, economics, law, and others, they don't actually in the program of teaching, so-called, they don't and they never have told the truth about what goes on in the field in real life. Notice what I'm saying. So that's the reason why I say that the universities are centers of corruption and criminality. And that is the reason why I say that in this context in England, the English judicial bureaucracy is a corrupt and racist and dishonest bureaucracy. Remember, I have given examples of the behavior of the first president of the Supreme Court after the reorganization outside of the House of Peers. Because what is the Supreme Court? Used to be the Supreme Court, that is the highest court of the so-called land, but it was kind of housed in the House of Peers. And they used to call it the Judicial Committee of the House of, quote, Lords. And it only in the last few years that they have wrestled it out of the House of Peers and given it a name that resembles the name given to the Supreme Court in many countries, especially the USA, but not exclusively. If you read the actual so-called judgments of the courts, that you are bound to conclude, if you read kind of objectively, neutrally, then you'll find that the Supreme Court kind of reasoning, and if you are intelligent, I mean, you have to be intelligent and you have to be knowledgeable. You have to have deep knowledge of the legal kind of principles in the textbook and the legal principles as they are binned. And you have to know the history of the Inns of Court. I mean, part of the corruption, the evidence of the criminality of the Inns of Court is that I was a barrister since 1973. But they took that away because I told off the main bureaucrat, lying racist, for being lying racist. So count from 1973 to now. How long have I been a barrister for? With that quotation, that disclaimer. So they lie, they tell lies, they break the law, they have no qualms about breaking the law. Because there is a wall that cannot be penetrated by objective observation or accountability or audit. Which is why when David Cameron has been a known sleazeball and a crook, he cannot be held to account, because if he is prosecuted, which he can be under various existing laws, including very many parts of the so-called common law, no judge will actually find him guilty, or jurors, because when the jurors have been set in token trials of racists, no juror has found any of the accused racist guilty. Think hard about what I'm saying. This is fact. So Charles Dickens, when he wrote about the law, so-called, he completely, absolutely misunderstood and misrepresented the actual practice of the licensed law traders, the judges, the judiciary. He focused on sensationalizing tiny aspects that didn't actually represent the real substance of the corruption called the English judiciary, English legal system, so-called. So what we have to do is to look at the actual possibility of finding sustainable, reliable mechanism and personnel to hold decision makers to account at every level, every single level. Saying about transparency is not of any importance, any use whatsoever. Transparency for what? On what criteria? Or what standard? In front of who? And with what consequences for failing and lying and misbehaving, misconduct? That has to be established. So, for example, going back to Daphne Gould at the then Tower Hamlets School for Girls had a kind of complete quota of governors on her school's governing body. But none of the governors appeared to even know what was going on in the school gates. Remember, I spent about good part of 2 years monitoring girls, like very kind of sexually mature girls, let's say, meeting large numbers of boys with very active hormones. And there were hundreds of abortions taking place as a result of their having sex. Now, none of the governors ever made a single noise whatsoever that I can kind of recall having heard. And an entire generation was being destroyed. And the performance of these girls at exams was appalling. So what I did in 1987, by doing the campaign to stop the changing of the composition of the school from a single-sex girls' school into a mixed-sex school, with the foisting of the sixth form as the starter Trojan horse, I actually set up a new school altogether. Because for the best part of a year, I argued. I didn't argue with people from outside. I argued with the parents or guardians of the existing girls. And I had to argue all over the place, all throughout, from A to Z. I had to advocate the case for a single-sex girls' school in that area. I had to argue with the parents themselves. Whereas people would assume that it was the parents who actually were most committed to the cause of a single-sex structure of the school. The parents didn't. The parents didn't care enough to join me in campaigning for the retention of this school status. I had to persuade the parents. So every parent that I successfully collected a signature from took up much more time than should have been necessary. I did that, and eventually the school was saved. But the task that I did, I was the one who did this, not anyone else, not Daphne Gould, not another teacher from the school of any background, not another member of the community of any description whatsoever. The only person who came with me from time to time, not every time, was the original parent who gave me the letter, which sparked me off and triggered me off to start this campaign, which he didn't think about. I had to think about as the only way to stop that imposition of the mixed sex kind of structure on the school by the then ILEA, Inner London Education Authority. And the Inner London Education Authority was, of course, a Labour Party controlled authority. And it was something that was fronted by the leader, Frances Morel. And as I have said before, because of her racism, I had no alternative but to edit her name. She was called Frances Morel, and I had to call her Frances Immoral, which of course didn't endear me to her. But the purpose behind my editing her name into Immoral was nothing to do with any personal relationship with her. It was to do with the fact that she was destroying lives of thousands of children in inner London schools by her wrong policies and her corrupt and racist policies. So I became the voice of the parents across the 10 boroughs that made up the Inner London Education Authority area. So I spoke out against the wrong policies being pursued by Frances Immoral, and I advocated the alternative, which was to create a series of proper, accountable, transparent, ethical and moral, and non-racist and anti-racist policies and initiatives. So anyone watching this must realize that we are still talking about the duties owed to the 4 girls from the Bethnal Green School, duties owed by the local Tower Hamlets Council. But the vista, the scope of my action against other authorities must show the context, the height of my involvement, and the depth of my engagement against other negligent elected authorities across London. So when I talk about the Inner London Education Authority, when I talk about saving the Marlbury School from destruction by a mixed sex transformation, I talk of the unique, world exclusive evidence. Now, what would Michelle Obama think of this school? Would she have any clue as to its history? If I didn't tell her, would she know that this is the history of the Marlbury School that she has been praising? She has been praising, of course, as part of her marketing of her book for the youngsters. That's fine. But does she know the history of the Marlbury School? Would it exist beyond 1990, let's say? I mean, I was talking about 1987, but let's say it took another 3 years or so before it became mixed sex. So if it had been mixed sex since 1990, Would that school be in existence 31 years later? 31 years on, she came and revived her connection with the school, as well as with the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson School in Camden. And would Michelle Obama know the overall context of the Tower Hamlets population demography? There weren't any dedicated group of people defending the school. It was me mobilizing the defense of the school. And the Inner London Education Authority was bribing other people in the community who went around smearing me behind my back to the community so that they could stop me persuading parents to give the requisite number of officially required signatures so that the proposal could be opposed constitutionally. Does Michelle Obama realize just how much hard work and determination that alone required? And this is the context, because what is happening with these girls, Mulberry School girls, like Mulberry School girls, but these Bethnal Green School girls being neglected by the local Tower Hamlets Council is similar negligence. That contrary to any mythology that might exist, that the local community is fully behind the welfare or educational welfare of the children, there is no evidence that any organization is bothered about the even life-destroying risks that these girls have been put through. Think about that. There are many kind of ethnicity-linked, my phrase, ethnicity-linked outlets in circulation or in existence in Tower Hamlets, or kind of addresses in Tower Hamlets. And these outlets are not anywhere near as accurate or as concerned as they should be, even after the fact that I'm making all the facts available to them. They don't know the facts. All the legal facts, all the constitutional law facts, and all the other related facts about the extent of the liabilities of the council owed to the children and betrayed by the council. These ethnicity-linked outlets are not anywhere near talking about these acts of negligence and failures. Think about what I'm saying. Now, the Financial Times today has got a piece headed, "Race is also a geopolitical matter." Remember, the race they're referring to also connects the role of Munira Mirza as Boris Johnson's ethnicity kind of denial propagandist, as part of a number of coconuts. Munira Mirza, Tony Sewer, Trevor Terrible Phillips, and the mainstream media, Fleet Street. This is why it's topical. The Financial Times piece, "Race is also a geopolitical matter." Now, this is Gideon Rahman. The Rahman is spelled, of course, not as an Arabic name, R-A-H-M-A-N. Is Rahman, is R-A-C-H-M-A-N. And it is kind of putting together the American situation as well. Okay, so this is the start of the piece by Gideon Rahman. White privilege, and then it comes to the phrase used by the Tony Sewer and Munira Mirza report. Institutional racism, unconscious bias, identity politics. These terms have become the currency of political debate in the US and the UK. But race is not just a domestic issue. At a time when global power is shifting arguments about racial equality, doesn't say racial equality, he says racial equity are also becoming part of the geopolitical struggle. Now, why is he saying equity, not equality? Is he hinting at a financial kind of angle? This being the Financial Times, which we have called financial crimes because it hides the truth about big business robbing the ordinary people. Ranked by purchasing power, the world's largest economies are now in order: China, the United States, India, Japan, and Germany. But the world's most important political institutions still reflect the political and economic power balance of 1945. The 5 permanent veto-wielding members of the United Nations Security Council are the US, Russia, China, the UK, and France. The fact that four of the permanent 5 are predominantly white countries arguably represents an international form of white privilege inherited from the age of empire. It looks unsustainable when roughly 5.8 billion of the global population of about 7.6 live in Asia and Africa. China is one of the privileged 5, however, and that limits Beijing's appetite to push for reform. The idea of India and Japan gaining a permanent seat at the world's top table would not be particularly welcome in Beijing. Regional rivalries between Nigeria and South Africa or between Mexico and Brazil have also helped to slow the impetus for reform at the United Nations. Nonetheless, arguments about race are becoming part of the contest between the US and China. And it goes on. This is not a radical, rigorous piece. This is a piece written in obvious terms with obvious facts. And it is not contrary to the need for balance to reflect the current realities of the world as opposed to the 1945 realities. Gideon Rahman is not opposing racism. And so therefore he is not actually questioning the racist core that operates at the center of the disequilibrium in the foundation and the founding kind of constitution and the current expression of that in the United Nations. So what we have here in the Financial Times is a piece that is actually touching on racism and empire, but not actually exposing racism and empire. And this is a piece that is, compared to the rest of Fleet Street, including The Guardian and The Observer, this is relatively not a part of the 100% racist narrative. This is like 30% racist and 70% ambivalent. In order to understand the United Nations and its bureaucracy, which is corrupt, and its bureaucracy, which is racist, its bureaucracy, which is anti-Muslim, it is important to understand why numerically there's so many Muslim countries who are members of the United Nations. Why so many of the Muslim countries have had no impact on the United Nations agenda. And when I say that, I don't necessarily include the kind of trendy references to the fact that the permanent members with the vetoing rights are reflecting the situation as it existed in 1945. I'm talking about the issues that have nothing to do with that kind of permanent membership thing to begin with. It's less important things in the sense of the United Nations bureaucratic priorities. They don't have any agenda at any level of the United Nations to name names, if you like. For example, the United Nations resolutions are never referred to in the daily propaganda issued by the United Nations on its television, news channels, and on the internet and social accounts. They don't publish the list of resolutions that have remained either contemptibly ignored or not implemented. Instead, they are replaced by the preaching attributed to the Portuguese origin holder of the Secretary General post, Antonio Guterres. He preaches. And by preaching, he is hiding the truth about the non-compliance of literally hundreds of UNO resolutions by UNO members. And by UNO members, I of course include all the member states. But the main emphasis is on the member states like the ones that are richer than the others, the richer countries, and the countries that are in violation of treaty obligations regarding their relations with their immediate neighbors. What I'm saying is that the United Nations, as Gideon Rahman correctly points out, needs reforming. But even if it's not reformed in the way that it should be, there are lots of things that can be done without waiting for the reform. And the one thing that would make such a difference would be if the United Nations resolutions were categorically and specifically published every day with a note against each resolution containing the list of countries that have actually abided by the resolutions and the list of countries that have ignored the resolutions. There is no sign that this is going to happen. And I have not seen any reference in any of the broadcasts from any platform that I'm making. So anyone watching this program who may know of any kind of different practice different from what I'm saying it is, can send me a direct message with the chapter and verse, that is to say, the date and the time and the platform where such a list has been published. As far as I can see at this moment, which is coming up to, what time is it coming up to now? It's probably approaching, it's 6 minutes to 11. 6 minutes to 1100 hours GMT on Tuesday, the 6th of April 2021. If anyone knows about the kind of difference in practice by the United Nations bureaucracies, different from what I'm summarizing it to be, then it would help get the record correct if there has been any evidence. And by evidence, I'm relating that evidence to the fact that the resolutions passed by the General Assembly and by the various agencies of the United Nations concerning various serious issues across the world, the fact of the resolution, each resolution, should be published by the United Nations every day or more than once every week, with a clear statement about each resolution, listing the countries, names of the countries that are complying with the resolution and the names of the countries that are not complying with the resolution. That would be the first step for auditing the United Nations and the behavior of the member countries. For example, when the Burmese committed the genocide in 2017 against the Rohingya Muslims, the United Nations bureaucracy was not very quick to respond. Some agencies were, but the central bureaucracy of the United Nations was very, very slow. And they didn't actually publish concerned statements attributable to the United Nations Secretary General. And there was no rush to help the victims of the Rohingya, of the genocide against the Rohingyas. The Rohingya genocide victims themselves led the way by desperately seeking shelters all over the world, and thousands of them got drowned in the process of looking for rescues, asylum, refuges. And the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, showed his contempt for the Muslim victims of this anti-Muslim genocide by kind of slowly expressing routine concern. And then shortly after that, he congratulated the known anti-Muslim hater, Narendra Modi of India. Now, compared to all of that, the recent so-called coup that has been carried out by the Burmese army has become almost a weapon of propaganda to excuse Aung San Suu Kyi of the genocidal offenses and crimes that she remains liable to be tried according to international law. Almost every day, the United Nations is issuing various versions of its concern at the military coup. Concerns at the military coup, attacking civilians, shooting dead civilians. And there is no mention of the outstanding burden of responsibility and liability owed by Aung San Suu Kyi, because she was the leader of the regime when it carried out the genocide of the Rohingya Muslims. Secondly, Aung San Suu Kyi condemned the Rohingya Muslims for allegedly setting up a defense of their community against the genocidal massacre attacks by the Burmese majority, non-Muslim majority. And she aggravated that by falsely claiming that the Rohingyas were not Burmese at all. Now, recorded evidence exists showing that the Rohingyas have been in Burma as Burmese population for hundreds of years. And the United Nations is failing to tell these truths, and thus the United Nations itself is breaking the various conventions of the United Nations. So for all these facts and evidence, we condemn the Secretary General Antonio Guterres for perpetuating violations of the United Nations obligations and treaties, because he is hostile to Muslims and he is delaying the bringing to trial of the leader of the genocide regime, Aung San Suu Kyi, and is taking part in the diversion by using this pretext and the excuse of the coup as a diversion from all of that liability for genocide. Because the victims of the genocide have been Muslims. Antonio Guterres would not dare say anything like a hundredth of the contempt he's showing to the Muslim victims of the genocide if the victims were of any other faith. So we are bringing to an end this one shortly after 1100 hours GMT, and we shall continue in the next